All right, so welcome to Puro Laro. This is our 14th episode today. As you notice, I haven't broken into our usual Tagalog. Due to respect to our guest today, he's a legend. He's the creative director of BoomZap Entertainment. And he's got games like Monster Roller, Super Awesome RPG, Quest Gold, and all that. Legends of Calais. I'm actually butchering that. Oh, Kalasia. All right. Okay. So let me welcome to the podcast for the first time our first foreign guest, Chris Natsuume.
How you doing? It's great to be here, and I'm so excited. I'm the first foreign guest. I did not know that. Now I feel important. I feel very loved right now.
You are. Okay. So Chris, you've been in the business. You've actually produced one of the best games that came out from Crytek and all that, which is Far Cry. Is that true?
It's all true. Yeah, I started making games in I think the first game I ever made shipped in it was 93 or 94, something like that.
Wow.
And I've been making games pretty much straightforward ever since. I've worked in Germany and in Utah and in Austin and Seattle, a bunch of other places. What a lot of people know me for, obviously, is I'm one of the co-founders of BoomZap, which we are now celebrating our 14th year of independent game development here in Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
But before that, I think what a lot of people know me for is I was the producer for Far Cry. I worked for Crytek, which was the original developer of the first Far Cry.
Yeah.
And so I helped to design and produce the original Far Cry. I lived in Germany for 2 years and did that. So that's what people used to know me for. People, I think, now probably know me a little bit better for BoomZap and the stuff we've done there. So, yeah, I've been around a bit. I think we tried to count it up once, and I think I quit counting at 50 games. So I've made at least 50 games. I'm not sure how many more.
Well, I'm sure there's so many more because, I mean, they're always saying that, right? They're always saying that a particular decade is the dawn of video games. So we've got the 90s, first the 80s and all that nobody has ever played a video game before, like the ones that we have for like in the 70s, like late 70s, like in the Atari age and in the family computer age, or I mean the Nintendo age. And then we got the PlayStation for the 90s and the Xbox. And now we're moving over to the 2000s, which is when Far Cry was made by Crytek. But right now, how do you think, since you've been in the industry for so long, how do you think game developing is compared to what it was several decades ago? So
I would say I probably fit in what I would call the second wave of game developers. So the first wave of game developers is the classic old developers, right? The guys who made the original Atari games, the guys who made games for Commodore 64, and maybe some of the first greats on PC, guys like Sid Meier or Lord British. So there was sort of those guys who I think are the real pioneers of the industry. And then there was sort of the generation that wanted to be those guys. And I came in as one of those generation that wanted to be those guys. Yeah. And, that was the Doom generation. The very first game I made back in the 90s was a Doom clone. So, I grew up in Texas. I was part of the Texas game development scene. And obviously the Texas game development scene in the early 90s was all about Doom and John Romero, and id was there. And, it was that scene. So I was working with people who were trying to compete directly with that. Back then, it was a very, very different industry. One of the big parts of it was nobody really knew that an industry existed. If you told people that you made games for a living, they kind of laughed at you because there just weren't that many of us, right? Now you've got game development schools and game development programs. I mean, any major university has some sort of game development program. When I originally got into games, it was actually, I used to be a dungeon master for a D&D group. And it never occurred to me that making games was a career. I never even considered where they came from. I guess I thought they, sprouted from trees or something. And so I I never thought about being a game developer because it wasn't something that you imagined being, right?
Yeah, the job didn't exist then.
I mean, there were people doing it, but it wasn't something that you like went to high school and you said, yeah, someday I'm going to be a game developer. Like that was a very rare thought. I mean, a couple people thought that, but I certainly didn't. And it just so happened that I was in an English class with a guy who I got to know, and we started playing Dungeons and Dragons together. And one night we were at a hot tub party. Actually, we were drunk at a hot tub party in Austin. And he said, I just got this job at this game company called Origin. And I was like, Origin? Those are the guys that made Ultima, right? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, holy shit, you got a job at Origin? I didn't even know you were a game programmer. And he was like, oh, no, I'm not a programmer. I'm a designer. And I was like, wait a minute. You can make games without programming? Right? Because up until that point, I mean, most people, I mean, if you look at the greats of game development up to that point, they weren't programmers, right? If you wanted to make a game, you had to code it yourself. The idea that you could be a designer and not actually program code games, I was like, wow, it never occurred to me that you could do that. And suddenly, like at that moment in that hot tub, I was like, I know what I want to be with my life. Like I had no idea that this was a thing that I could do. But the minute I heard that it was a thing, I didn't want to do anything else. And I went and I applied for a job at Origin, and they told me to get lost. And I applied again a couple months later, and they kept telling me to get lost. And it was really sad because my D&D group, they all worked at Origin. And so I would go to Origin every Wednesday night, and we would use their conference room to play Dungeons and Dragons. And I was the dungeon master for their D&D group. And finally, at one point, a bunch of those guys quit Origin to go start their own game company. It was a little company you've never heard of called Maelstrom. And when they split off, that was my D&D group. And so suddenly we couldn't meet at Origin anymore. We had to go to their office to play. And I think they felt really uncomfortable with me not working for them because they all knew I wanted a job in games. And up until then, they could be like, well, Origin won't let you in. But when it was their company, they had to be like, we won't let you in. So they had to let me in then. And so that was my first job in games, was my D&D group hired me to make levels for them. It was a very, very different world back then. What
was the game that you made levels for?
There was a game called The Fortress of Dr. Radiaki. If you type in The Fortress of Dr. Radiaki, there's some crappy old YouTube videos of it. It was not a good game. It was one of those old like 2.5D games where it looked kind of like the original Doom. It looked kind of 3D, but the ceiling was flat, the floor was flat. It kind of ran through a maze, and you shot heavily pixelated people. It was not a great game, but it was, our first game, and we were kind of proud of it. And after that, I worked at a couple other companies. There's a long history there, but the real difference is in that period of game development, it was much more obvious and clear how you were going to make a game. I mean, there were very clear players. There was a publisher, there was a developer, there were retailers, right? And you made a demo, and you took your demo to the publisher, and the publisher told you, yeah, we like that demo. We'll pay you X amount of money to finish that game. And you would get your money from your publisher, and the publisher would then take your game to E3, and everyone would look at your game at E3. And the whole point to E3 back then was that was for the retailers, right? The retailers would all come in, and they would look at all the games, and it was held back in like May back then, because that's how long it took for the orders that they would make for those games to get manufactured and put on CDs and put into boxes, and the boxes to be shipped in time for November for the Christmas sales, right? So all the way back in May, Walmart and Kmart and Best Buy and all these other companies would have to figure out, how many thousands of copies of, World of Warcraft or whatever they wanted to buy, and put in the stores. And the industry was really straightforward and simple. And you as a game developer, you didn't talk to your audience. There was no way to talk to your audience. To put it in perspective, when I made Fortress of Dr. Radiaki, there was no internet. It's hard to explain to people that, we made games in that company, I had to literally, when it was time for me to give because I was working from home, I would copy all of my stuff onto 5 1/4 inch floppy disks and get in my car with my computer. And nobody had laptops back then. We all had desktops with those great big huge CRT monitors. And so I would haul my CRT monitor and my big huge desktop downstairs and put them in the back seat of my Subaru, and I would drive across town, and we would all meet at my friend Edwin's house, and we would line up all the computers on a couple big folding tables, and we would swap 5 1/4-inch floppy disks between all the computers until everyone had all the data. And that's what we had instead of the internet back then, you know. And it's hard for people to imagine how incredible it is just to be able to email something to someone as part of the development process. But I digress. Anyway, back then, there was this really simple world of game development where you didn't deal with your customers, you didn't deal with the media. As a game developer, you had a publisher, and if the publisher was happy, everything was cool. And you compare that back till now, right? Where, you know, right now we're in the middle of making a game called Last Regiment, and Last Regiment's sort of our second strategy game for Steam. And so, all right, we're making that. We're self-funding it. We're building it ourselves. There's no publisher. We're going to take it to Steam. Steam doesn't really care about my game as long as it doesn't break anything. They're happy to have it on Steam. There's not really any trouble getting it up on the distribution network. So anyone can get a game out. You know, back when I started games, if you couldn't get a publisher to take your game, you didn't get to make games, right? So there was this huge barrier to entry back then that doesn't exist now, which back then, maybe I thought that would have been cool. But the problem is, without a barrier to entry, everybody and their dog can make a video game and put it up on Steam. And so now you're competing with, you know, hundreds of thousands of games. I mean, every week, thousands of games are released. I'm not exaggerating when I say that. If you look across Steam and the app stores and Flash games, every week thousands of games are released. And so the challenge now is, how do you get anyone to know about you? Well, you can't go to the media, because who reads game media anymore? It's very rare that anyone, you know, goes and reads a game review magazine to figure out what they're going to buy, right? That doesn't happen.
God. I can remember those, man. Electronic Gaming Monthly.
I mean, back in the day, the media mattered. If you were a writer for PC Gamer, you were like a god. You walked around E3 with this huge halo around you, because people would read PC Gamer and go, "Oh wow, Civ 2, it's coming out this month. I'm going to go get it." That's how people knew that games existed now. But now you have to have this whole marketing plan that includes podcasts and Twitch and Twitter and Facebook, and it's this crazy rabbit hole where you're like, okay, how do I get anyone to know about my game? Oh, I'll put a Discord up. Okay, how do I get people to come to my Discord? Oh, okay, we'll do a Reddit. Well, how do I get anyone to know that my Reddit exists? Okay, and like every new marketing angle that you put together, you have to do marketing for your marketing. You know, and you're like, okay, I put a Reddit up. I'm going to do AMA on Reddit. And I put a Facebook message up, and I put a Twitter to tell people to go to my Facebook page to learn about that. And you're just, it's crazy, right?
Yeah.
None of this existed in the early days of games, because the publishers just, you know, it was much, much simpler. It's now, I would say in many ways, it's way easier now to make a game. I mean, with all the tools that you have, with the internet and with all of the stuff you can buy off the internet, with tools like Unity, blah, blah, blah. I mean, anyone can put a game together now if they put their mind to it.
Yeah.
But
so basically right now, game development or creating games or video games in general right now are releasing it, letting anybody know about it, is much more focused on marketing now versus developing, because like you said,
it's all marketing now. Anyone can develop a game. Anyone who puts their mind to it can develop a game. And on top of that, we have seen the rise of indie gaming. We've seen the rise of casual gaming. I mean, you look at some of the games. I mean, one of the highest performing entertainment products in the world, and I'm not talking about games, I'm talking about any kind of entertainment product in the world. One of the highest performing entertainment products in the world right now is still Candy Crush, right? And I'm not putting the game down. It's a good game, but let's face it, this isn't World of Warcraft, right? This is, you know, in terms of how difficult it was to put Candy Crush together, it doesn't even, you know, it doesn't even come close in terms of the development budget or cost or time to make. But if you look at the many billions of dollars that have been spent on marketing and on advertising, et cetera, Candy Crush is 5% game and 95% marketing.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of the game world right now. And even games that are substantially more in-depth titles than Candy Crush. You look at Clash Royale. Again, good game. I don't have anything against Supercell, but that game is maybe 25% game and 75% the process of marketing it. And that process of marketing it, and I don't mean that to degenerate the game. That process of marketing includes learning how to soft launch a game, learning how to take feedback from your users, learning how to build a community. There's this whole thing that comes after the day that you finish making your game that is actually the process of making a game now. And I think a lot of young indie developers, they put together their, cool little pixel roguelike and put it up on Steam, and then they're like, I'm done. And I'm like, yeah, you're 15-20% done, but you haven't even really started the fight. And that's, in my mind, that's the biggest thing that's different is, even in the days when I made Far Cry, I mean, the world as we understood it, even then, and that was 2004, that wasn't that long ago. Even then, the world made more sense. There were, online magazines that interviewed us. We took it to E3, and it sold in boxes, and people bought it in boxes. We printed CDs of it. Even then, I didn't, as the producer of that game, my involvement with the community was limited to answering emails and talking to media.
Yeah.
So this huge, massive change in the way that we deal with our audience and the way that we deal with all of this marketing stuff, it's still relatively new. It's still 10 years old or so.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, because a game like, let's say, Fortnite, which is pretty popular, wouldn't actually hold a candle towards a game like, not to put down the game, like you said, Game of War, which actually had a Super Bowl ad, right? So, I mean, when it comes to that, I mean, right now you have a new game. I saw your game, and coming from a background where I'm all strategy, let's just say I've played all civs, so that's where I come from. So, I mean, seeing your game and all that, how do you think, what are your strategies right now on taking Last Regiment on another level, particularly on this market, the Southeast Asian market?
So, one of the, I sound a little bitter in my discussion of marketing and all that, but there's another side to it. And the other side is, even if I were to go back to 2004, if I said to somebody, I make video games, somebody would tell me, oh, video games, that's cool. My son would like what you do, right? There was still that idea that video games were something that a small part of culture played. At this point, we've gotten to a stage in our development where games are as eponymous as music. To ask somebody, do you play video games, is a nonsensical question at this point. The question is, what game do you play, right? Yeah. And in this world, there is this new thing, which is you can make a niche title. You don't, back when we were making games in 2000, if your game didn't hit 50% of the game audience, it was a failure, right? You had to make, every game had to be good for every gamer. But now we've reached this new world where it would be crazy to think of trying to make a game that's going to hit every gamer. And for us with Last Regiment, that's sort of our saving grace, that we can say, look, Last Regiment isn't for everybody. If you're looking for a free-to-play game with asymmetric gameplay where I can buy a victory by buying a bunch of cards and feel like a badass, we didn't make a game for you. There's 500 games out there for you. Go play those games. This game is not for you, right? But there is a group of people out there who, like you and I, grew up playing Civ, which was my favorite game when I was a kid, who grew up playing strategy games, and now we're older. And I don't have all week to play a game of Civ like I used to, right? I mean, and especially if I want to play multiplayer. I don't know if you've ever played multiplayer Civ, but oh my God, it takes weeks. I mean, literally weeks. And
That's
so
right, yeah.
I was like, I'm 45. I got teenage kids and a job and a wife, and I got a life. I can't dedicate all weekend to playing Civ anymore. It's not an option. But I still want to play a game like that. And when we originally built Legends of Kalasia, which was the game we did before Last Regiment, that was the dream, was how do we make a strategy game for that guy, that very specific user, somebody who wants to play a strategy game. They don't have all day to play it, but they still want to do the things that you do in a strategy game. They still want to build things. They still want to make armies and take over territory and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So we built Legends of Kalasia. It was a good game, critically well reviewed. But to be brutally honest, it had a number of sort of my first strategy game errors in it. And we said, what are we going to do? Are we going to go back and make redo this game and rebuild this game? And I said, you know what? There's a couple key decisions that we made early on in the game that I think you'd have to start the game from scratch to fix. One of the biggest ones was a lot of people wanted to build content. They wanted to make their own maps. They wanted to share maps. And the way we had designed that game, you would have had to open up Photoshop, and it was impossible to build a map easily for that game. So we said, look, from the very beginning with Last Regiment, we need to make this game a game where you can actually ship an editor and you can have people build their own maps and trade their maps and that sort of thing. And from that decision came the decision, we probably should just build a whole new game from scratch, because we have to literally build it all from scratch if we change the way that the levels are handled. And that was sort of the birth of Last Regiment was, well, if we're going to make that change, we can make a bunch of other changes too about the way that people understand how units move, et cetera, et cetera. There was a lot of kind of cool changes that we put in. So Last Regiment is sort of our second attempt at and I hate to use the word casual, because when you say casual, people think casual games, casual, but a hardcore strategy game that doesn't take forever, right?
Okay.
So that's where we sit. And so that once you ask the question, how do I market that? You have to say, well, where's the user for that? Where do we find that user? And this has been sort of our struggle lately, is trying to figure out the best way to reach out and find that user, because that user is not as, I guess, socially active as, say, the guys who play Fortnite. If I were to go to Twitch and look right now at what's being live streamed, even though Europa Universalis and Crusader Kings and Civilization are huge games, there really aren't a lot of people streaming them. I bet there's probably not more than 10 people right now streaming Europa Universalis, and that's a big game, right?
Yep.
And in fact, when I went once and looked at, I don't know what it is right now, but I looked at how many people are streaming Civ, and it was like 15, 20 people. And Civ's one of the biggest games out there, right? Yeah. But then at the same time, there was some little, flavor of the week game. I think it was Mother Truckers or something like that. And it had like 750 people streaming it. And I'm pretty sure if I go look right now, there's maybe 2 people streaming it. But at that particular time, that was the fun game to stream, because it had been sort of designed for streaming. And so we've looked at, I actually do a live stream of our game, and you can watch us develop the game, et cetera. But we've had to kind of say, you know what, maybe our audience doesn't stream. Maybe watching live streams isn't a big thing that they do. And we're now, kind of looking around for, where do we find that audience? It's a challenge. I mean, I wish I could be like, and here's the solution, but we haven't really found it yet. We've taken the game to a bunch of game shows, but again, we run into the problem that guys who play Civ don't spend a lot of time at game shows. They're older. They got, stuff to do with their lives.
That is correct.
It's there's a lot of people that play League of Legends at the game shows, watching the League of Legends tournaments, but that's not a Civ player, right?
Yeah.
We've talked about taking it to board game shows, because actually we think there's a huge crossover between board gamers and Civ players. And so we've talked about, maybe we should take this to Origins or Gen Con or something like that this summer and show those people this game. But I think what it's going to boil down to in the end is we're going to have to buy a bunch of Facebook ads. We do know that people my age do use Facebook, and if we show them ads and we can show them, hey, this is a game that you might be interested in, but that's ad budget, and you have to sit down and say, well, how many of these ads can we buy, and what's the click-through rates, and what does the funnel look like, and you get into this whole world of marketing, which it doesn't matter what you do, however you slice this pie, you're going to spend money on marketing, you're going to spend time on marketing, and it's going to be painful. Well, yeah, it's a real challenge.
Yeah, mentioning that, do you think, because you said earlier that your game tackles a percentage of the market, and particularly an older percentage of the gaming market and all that. With that said, do you think at this point in time, with all the internet, with all the Facebook, all the ads, IGN existing and all that, do you think word of mouth is still an effective?
Very much so. Very much so. And it's one of the reasons why, for instance, you would be a fool to put a game out that doesn't have multiplayer in it, and doesn't have fun multiplayer. When we did Legends of Kalasia, one of the things we found was people would play our game and they would say, wow, this game is really fun. So I went and got 3 of my friends to go play it because I wanted somebody to play with. We did, and we're going to be doing this on Last Regiment as well. Once we got the game into open beta and put it into early access, I would actually play the game live on stream. And we did actually get quite a few people come to those live streams because they were looking for somebody to play with, right? So that's a big thing, putting multiplayer in your game so that you can get people who need other people to play to come play with them. Another thing is, can you make things in it that are worth posting about? Is the story interesting enough that people will be like, oh, I was playing this game, I had this really cool story, I had these really cool characters, something that they might tell someone else about. But again, we run into the problem of our selected audience isn't a chatty group of people, right? these aren't people who are going to get on Twitch and demonstrate their game to 500 people. They're not people who are going to dress up as our characters and walk around at video game conventions. It's it's a lot of 45, 50-year-old potbelly dudes, and I'm still struggling to figure out how we get those 45-year-old potbelly dudes to go find other 45-year-old potbelly dudes to play the game with them. That's been a struggle for us.
All right, so let me just expound on that word of mouth thing. Okay, would you agree that having some streamers play your game would boost that word of mouth thing? Because I mean, most of the time, gamers watch streamers so they know what they want to play.
So I'll tell you, there's 2 kinds of streamers, right? There's many kinds of streamers, but you could put them in 2 large camps. Camp 1 is specialist game streamers, right? This is the guy that streams Hearthstone, and people watch him because they want to get better at Hearthstone. And if he plays anything but Hearthstone, he's going to lose his audience because people are there to watch this dude play Hearthstone, right? That's true. Streamer type A, right? Then there's streamer type B, and streamer type B is an entertaining personality. And people watch him because of him, or her, because they are funny and interesting, and they care about that individual. And that individual can play anything as long as that thing is entertaining, and people will watch. And they're not watching to see the game; they're watching to see the entertainer entertain. Now, if type A comes and plays your game, the response isn't so great because those people, they're not there to watch and play your game; they're there to watch and play that game, right? So it's very and that person it's difficult to get that person to change to your game because they know this too, right? So you go to type B streamer, and type B streamer, she might play your game, and for a day or 2 you might get a huge lift because maybe a whole bunch of people will be like, oh, I really love this, I really love this streamer, and she was playing this game and I wanted to check it out. And we actually had some streamers play our game, and we actually had that happen. But it's very short-lived, because that streamer doesn't stay on your game. They move to another game over time. And when they move on, their audience moves along with them. Now, you might get some organic lift from she played your game, a bunch of her people checked your game out, and X percentage of those people actually thought it was cool, and they stuck around, and maybe their word of mouth brought some more people in. We had some of that with Legends of Kalesia, but it tailed off really, really fast.
Okay.
Now, what we did find for a strategy game, though, was that YouTubers were useful.
Yeah.
Because people do actually watch YouTubers. And we actually went out and found a couple people who had done Europa Universalis YouTubes or had done Crusader Kings YouTubes or something similar to our game, right? And gave them our game and said, hey, we'll give you access to our team and we'll answer a bunch of questions and we'll promote you and whatnot. And we got them to do some sort of YouTube series of strategy for Legends of Kalesia. And those ended up being a better investment for us, actually. Because for one thing, those YouTubes live forever, right? Live streams, sure, there's video recordings of the live streams, but nobody watches that. Nobody goes, the Twitch is about what's happening right now. You don't even watch something that's an hour old on Twitch unless you're a diehard fan, right? But YouTube, if somebody says, again, you go back to how does somebody buy your game off of Steam, right? They open up Steam. There's in the new release section, they see, oh, look, here's Last Regiment. I haven't heard of that before. Oh, look, it's overwhelmingly positive. I'll check that out. They go to your Steam site. On your Steam site, you've got a video. They watch your little video for a second, and that's what tells them, is this a game that I'm even interested in playing or not, right? At that point, if they're interested, what a lot of people will do is go back out to the internet, type in the name of your game, and look for some videos.
Yeah, that's usually what it's do.
Yeah, and if somebody out there has made a bunch of YouTube videos, even if he's not a popular guy, even if all those YouTube videos only had five or six views, the fact that your Google search returns a whole bunch of dudes that videoed your game, whoever is right now considering whether or not they should download your game thinks, oh, this is a legitimate game. Somebody cares, right? And the chances that they're going to download your game and check out the free demo section of it are much, much higher.
Yeah.
So for me, that was a really good expense of time and energy. And it's something that we'll definitely do again with Last Regiment, is go out and find 25 or 30 of those kind of people. And, we may even actually, sponsor some of them. And, I know for some people sponsoring is kind of a dirty word, like, oh my God, you paid somebody to play your game. But these guys are putting a lot of effort out, right? For some guy to sit and, record in videos and narrate them and edit them down into something that's decent. I'm kind of the opinion that, we should throw him something, at least throw him a bunch of free copies he can give to his users or something.
Yeah.
So, I don't have anything against the idea of sponsoring a few of those people, and looked at as part of a marketing budget. I think that's a pretty reasonable spend, to be honest.
This is the point where I actually missed the guy, Total Biscuit, in his WTF series. I mean, this is actually a show that I watched to find out something about a game. I just type in WTF and then this unknown game that I've been hearing about, and then he'll have a video about it. There are YouTubers like that who actually focus on the content, and plus you as a developer could get like free feedback. And because these guys are experienced on checking out alpha stages and everything, alpha stages of games and all that. So I mean, that's a good point there.
I'll tell you, actually, one of my, I bring my games to game conventions, and I get whatever the cheapest booth that convention has, and I put down a couple tables and put our game out. And to be honest, if I look at that as a marketing expense for how many emails did we pick up at that game convention, every convention I've been to has been a loss. I've been to ESGS, I've been at PAX, I've been to a bunch of them. If I'm purely looking at it as a marketing vehicle, if you look at the expense that I put into that convention and then divide it by the number of emails I picked up, I end up paying like $10 an email. It's a terrible, terrible expense. But what I also get is I get to sit at a convention and stare over a bunch of people's shoulders and see how they respond to my game. And that particular experience is worth the money. right? It's actually, and in fact, a shout out, by the way. I don't know. I get you guys were at ESGS. That's where you found us. You found our booth at the ESGS.
Yeah.
A big shout out to ESGS. I think Jobert and that crew are doing more for the Philippine game industry than just about anyone else out there. This show has gotten better year in and year out. I'm going to buy a bigger booth next year. And again, it's I won't make my money back in marketing expense. It's not like I'm going to sell 100,000 copies in the Philippines because we had a booth at ESGS. It doesn't work like that. But I want to get a bigger booth because I want to put 4 computers down next year so I can have 4 people play, and I watch 4 people play at the same time because I get huge value out of that. And the thing that people don't tell you is, after they play, they'll turn around and they'll tell you some stuff. Oh, you should do this or you should do that. And usually that particular bit of information is garbage. That guy is not a game developer. He's a gamer. And it would be like if I were a cook and I served you some food, and after dinner he said to me, oh, you should use more pepper. No, dude, you don't know what I should use more of. You're not a cook. But the fact that you didn't like my food, that's valid input, right? And so the key is to sit over somebody's shoulder and watch them play and see, where did they get frustrated? Where did they have fun? What did they like? What did they not like? And they're going to offer you some solutions for how to fix it. And maybe sometimes they'll be decent, but 9 times out of 10, the solutions they offer are not fully thought out, not reasonable solutions. But where they were happy and where they weren't happy, that's truth, right? They didn't make that up. And you can watch that and you can pull that information and you can go back and say, look, I watched 10 people play this game and 8 of those 10 people got confused here. Or most people quit this game halfway through this level because this thing was too challenging. Now it's your job. You're the game developer. You're the expert. You got to figure out how to fix that or why they quit. They don't know. They're not expert game developers. They're just game players. But they do know that they weren't happy there, and that's valid input, right? So for that, I find going to a game convention really useful experience.
Okay. We've gone through your experience as part of Crytek, part of one of the biggest companies and all that. So now you're in the indie scene. Do you think the indie scene is doing much better, but not in terms, of course, of selling out, but in terms of content that they're putting out, the creativity and all that? Do you think the indie scene right now, this stage, particularly with most of the AAA developers being bashed or being criticized for their money grubbing techniques and everything, do you think the indie scene is where any average gamer should look when they want a creative idea or something like that? Or do you think?
I'm not as sort of highfalutin as that. I mean, there are people out there that want to play Candy Crush, and you know what? More power to them. Have fun, play Candy Crush, right? You want to put $200 into a match 3? Be my guest, right? I don't judge. So I don't necessarily think that the big AAA casual studios, or some people out there want to go play some, Hearthstone. Blizzard sure as hell ain't indie. And I don't have any problem with the guy who wants to play Hearthstone. That's what he wants to play. Okay. But I will say the indie scene kind of, if you put an infinite number of monkeys on an infinite number of typewriters, someone's going to write Shakespeare, right? And the indie scene is kind of that. There are just so many people out there making so many things. And you know what? 95% of it's garbage. But there's so much of it out there that the 5% that's not garbage is pretty awesome, right? And the trick right now is, how do you winnow through the garbage to find the 5% that's really good? Because the 5% that's really good is some of the best games out there. And, sometimes that 5% doesn't have the production quality that you wish it would have because, it was some guy working alone in a basement in Czechoslovakia. I guess Czechoslovakia is not a country anymore, is it? I guess he'd be in the Czech Republic at this point, or Slovakia. One of those two places. He's either in the Czech Republic or Slovakia. But he's in the basement, and this is the best art he could come up with, and he's a great game, and it's a lot of fun, but it looks like crap. There's a lot of that in the indie scene right now, and I wish that lonely guy in the basement in Slovakia could team up with a great artist and put together that really great idea with really high production values and go out and compete with Supercell. But he's gonna he's going to be challenged to do that, right? And there are people who break out as indies. One of the great success stories of the indie movement in my mind was Crossy Road. The guy who made Crossy Road, a guy named Matthew Hall, and he co-developed that with Andy. I can't remember what Andy's last name was, but the two of them together formed a company called Hipster Whale. And I didn't know Andy that well, but Matthew's been a friend of mine for years. And, I knew Matthew back when he and I were competing, making casual games for Big Fish Games and stuff like that. And, he made Crossy Road living on a sheep farm in Australia with, basically money out of his pocket over like a 6-month period. And then he went out and, made millions and millions of dollars on the app stores. And I think a lot of people look at Crossy Road and say, like, I want to replicate that success. And, however you might feel about, is Crossy Road a great game experience? Is it innovative or whatever? I don't know. I thought it was a lot of fun. I thought it was a cute game. But there's that opportunity out there, that opportunity that you could be the next guy from the middle of nowhere, builds a game in, 6 to 12 months on not a lot of money, and suddenly you're a millionaire. Like that option is there for people in a way that has never been there before. The truth is, 99.999% of the developers will not have that experience. And 95% of them probably won't even ship their title. They'll stop halfway through development. For every Crossy Road, there's 200 developers that never really figured out how to use Unity and gave up and went back to whatever they were doing before. But there's just so many of them out there that the 5% or whatever percent that actually ship a game and actually put something out that's interesting, some of that's going to be great. And you contrast that back against, Electronic Arts. You look at the budgets of these games, right? When we put Far Cry together, remember Far Cry was in 2004. It's the Stone Ages. That game had a budget of like €6.5 million. And I remember thinking €6.5 million, that's crazy money. No one will ever make a game as expensive as this again. €6.5 million is nothing now. God knows what the Red Dead Redemption costs, that you're in the hundreds of millions of dollars, $500-600 million or more to make those games. These are some of the most expensive entertainment products in the world. And so if you're looking at a 3-year, $500 million development budget, your ability to just go out there and try some things is pretty limited, right? I mean, you got a whole studio pounding away and your cash burn is, $15 million a month. Well, if you wasted a month on a game feature that doesn't work, you threw away $15 million of somebody's money. You can't do that. And so the big AAA studios, I don't think their constraint is that they're bad people or that they're money grubbing or anything like that. They're just huge and unwieldy. I'll tell you a true story, actually. Back when this was quite a few years ago when we were in the casual game industry making games for Big Fish, and EA started a new division. It was the EA Casual Games Division. And they were really proud of it. They were going to compete against Big Fish and Oberon and iWin and all the big casual game companies at the time. This is in, I want to say 2009 or something like that. And I had a meeting with them. I was right at the beginning. And I brought them a game design for a cute little casual game that I wanted to make. I wanted them to fund it. And I think it had a budget of like $25,000-30,000, right? And I was like, $30,000, I'll make this game for you. Won't it be fun? And the guy looked at me like I had come to the meeting naked or something, like this is a complete look at disbelief. And he was like, you understand that at EA, just for me to take this design up the channel and have everyone approve it that needs to approve it and get it greenlit, that process alone costs $10,000.
Wow.
A third of your development budget would be spent literally just on going through all the paperwork and bullshit that you have to do at EA just to get anyone to agree to make this.
That's within the company already. Wow.
Yeah, and he was like, this is and I was like, I don't know how you ever think EA Casual Games is going to work, and in fact, it didn't. it was a failed division, and they ended up solving that by buying PopCap. But the point being, these big companies aren't built to compete against indies. It's like elephants trying to compete against ants. They can't. But people still want to play Red Dead Redemption, right? People still want to play Gears of War and stuff like that. And there's no indie studio on earth that can go out and compete head to head with Grand Theft Auto with what Grand Theft Auto does, right?
Uh-huh.
So, I don't think it's a this or that issue. It's sometimes you want to go see the great big Hollywood blockbuster movie that cost a fortune, and sometimes you want to go see a cool, sometimes you want to sit on TV and watch BoJack Horseman. They're just two totally different things, right?
That is correct.
And I'm not sure that BoJack Horseman is better or worse than, the latest Avengers movie. But I can tell you their budgets are sure as hell different, right?
Yeah, well, that's true. That's true. I mean, well, you went to BoJack Horseman, so that's hard to compete. Okay, so what I was thinking is, since we were on the mobile end, before I go there, you mentioned Crossy Road and all that, because there's this one game that actually made it big also in the world, which is Flappy Bird, made by a guy in I think Thailand or Vietnam and all
Vietnam,
that.
Yeah, it was a Vietnamese dude. I've met him.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, I met him at a convention once.
I mean, the story about him is like he didn't know what to do with it because he was just making it. I think it was his like fourth or third game or something like that. So it's like, oh, okay, I hit it big and I didn't know what to do with the money and all that. So I mean, one of the stories.
These are the stories at the top end of the scale, but there's a whole lot of stories at the mid end of the scale. Some guy who made a cool word game, and his cool word game made him $500,000. And in the States, you'd be pretty excited, but in Manila, $500,000, shit, you're retiring, right? I mean, you're done.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And the thing is, the guy on the App Store who's buying those games, you didn't know that guy was in Thailand or Vietnam. You don't know, or you care, right?
Yeah.
So there's nothing in that sense, and this is something I always tell. BoomZap is a Southeast Asian studio. We were born and raised in Southeast Asia. Half of our team is Filipino. We got people all across Southeast Asia. So I talk to a lot of Southeast Asian developers, and I tell them, you have this enormous advantage that you can compete at a level that other people can't compete at. I won't tell you the name of the studio, but there's a friend of mine that runs a studio in the Philippines, and I know for a fact that his total budget for his little studio is about $6,000 a month, right? That's nothing. That's compared to, $6,000 a month won't even get you an intern in San Francisco. But in Manila, that'll get you a small, reasonably skilled development team. And that's a little indie team. They're self-funding their own stuff, and that $6,000 a month that they're getting is off of a title that they have shipped before. And they're living off of their income from their earlier games, and they're quietly building more games. And most studios in the world can't do that. If they only had an income of $6,000 or $7,000 a month, they'd have to quit what they're doing and go get real jobs. But in Manila, you can survive on that, and you can make more games, and you can try again to hit it, And if they make a game that makes, $50,000 a month, come on, how far does $50,000 a month go in Manila? It goes a long way, man.
It is. That's true.
So it's this, it's this enormous power that the Philippines has. The other way that you can look at it, and this is closer to the BoomZap model. And by the way, the numbers that I just told you about that studio, those were released in a talk at Game Fest right before ESGS. So I'm not like telling somebody secret information. He actually expressed those numbers in a public talk. That's where I got those. So I'm not like putting someone else's business on the street. But the BoomZap way of looking at it is, you know what, we can go out and compete with real production values, right? So, I certainly don't run BoomZap on $6,000 a month. We spend a heck of a lot more than that. But I can go out and compete head to head with quality that's equal to the quality of, a mid-range casual game built in Europe or in America, but I can do it at, a fifth of the cost. And again, if my game makes X amount of money, that would have been a complete failure in Europe or North America that would have shut those studios down. For me, I can say that was a marginal success, and I can keep going. This gives me an enormous. This is why we're still here 14 years later. If I had been running this studio out of Seattle, I would have shut the studio down years ago. We couldn't have lived this long.
So, talking about that, since it's now lucrative to actually do business here in Southeast Asia, how is the talent pool here compared to the Western scene and all that? Is it comparable?
It's young. The thing about Southeast Asia is it doesn't have. I mean, there's nothing that makes a Filipino or a Singaporean or a Malaysian any less creative or any less smart or any less skilled or talented than an American. Right. Okay. I will put a 5-year experienced Filipino game developer up against a 5-year experienced game developer anywhere else in the world, and they will be a little better or a little worse depending on the individual. Right. They won't be substantially different. Okay. The difference is if I want to go find a 10-year experienced game programmer in Manila, I can count those on one hand. Right. They just don't exist. Because there hasn't been a game industry in the Philippines for 10 years, not a big one. It's maybe a little bigger now. I guess 5 years ago, my statement would have been true. Probably now I can count those programmers on two hands. So if you're trying to build a game studio in Southeast Asia, in Malaysia or in the Philippines, you just kind of have to say to yourself, well, it's going to be a bunch of people who've only developed games for 2 or 3 years. And they're going to have the same problems that a 2 or 3 year game developer in America or Europe would have. The difference is in Europe or America, you have a 15-year or 20-year experienced game developer managing them and teaching them. And so, again, I think one of the big successes of BoomZap has been we brought in some people who had longer experience. Myself, my business partner, Alan, who's been in the game industry almost as long as me. The first hires we made were a couple people who've been making games a very long time over in Malaysia, local Malaysians, because that has a slightly older game industry than the Philippines does. And so, just between myself, Alan, and the 2 first Malaysians we hired, Adrian and Ben, I think between us, we've got 25, something like 70 years of game experience. About 60 years of game experience between the 4 of us. So that's a wealth of experience that's very difficult to find in the Philippines through no fault of its own. It's just not an old industry there. So for me, I'm very bullish on Southeast Asia because there is now, if not a very experienced game industry, there is a large game industry in Southeast Asia. There's lots of Filipino developers, and they're making more every day. There's lots of Malaysian developers. There's a bunch of Singaporean developers, and they're all smart folks, and they're going to get better every year. And you already see it. One of my favorite game companies in the Philippines, obviously, is Altitude, and Altitude is run by, there were 5 founders of the studio. 3 of those founders are actually ex-BoomZap. And it was Luna and Gabby and Mark and a couple other folks went and decided to start their own local Filipino studio. And when they did, they started it with people who had gained a great deal of experience either before BoomZap at other studios or at BoomZap. And they took that experience and made a new studio with it. And I think you're going to see more and more of that. It's why I'm really excited about, for instance, some people were like, oh, I don't know about Ubisoft moving to the Philippines. That's the best thing that ever happened to the Philippines. In another 10 years, that's going to be just, throwing off experienced developers that are going to go start their own studios. And now you're going to have experienced game developers that can lead teams and can train people that come out of college. And you see that happening in Singapore already. LucasArts put a studio in Singapore, Ubisoft put a studio in Singapore, and there's lots of studios right now that are full of ex-LucasArts, ex-Ubisoft folks that were trained by people from overseas who just had they come from regions that have a longer experience in game development.
Do you think that's happening now? Because
it's going to take time. It's going to take, we're talking in time scales of decades, right? You don't make a 10-year experienced programmer in 5 years, right?
That's correct.
It's just going to take time. But I think you see it starting. I think Altitude is a very good example of how it's already starting. There's other studios coming up that are probably not quite as prestigious yet, but they're getting there. I think over the next 5 years, you're going to see a lot of successful studios coming out of places like Manila and Kuala Lumpur and Jakarta. I'm quite bullish on it, to be honest.
Okay. So do you think in Southeast Asia, because what do you think will the penetrate be? Will it be on a mainstream, like mainstream gaming or consoles, or would it be more of mobile, or is it just general?
I don't know that anyone can answer that. What's going to happen, and what usually happens, is there'll be one or two big successes, and where that success happens will be more determined by what that particular studio was interested in than anything else. I will say that console development is harder to break into because there's a bigger barrier to entry in console development. For one thing, you got to go buy a bunch of consoles and dev kits and stuff.
Yeah.
I think mobile is so easy to get into that there's probably some. Let me rephrase. Mobile is so easy to develop for. I don't know that it's particularly easy to break out and have a hit game in mobile right now.
Yeah.
But it's certainly easy to develop for. I think those are things that make some sense, but it's going to be based on, there's going to be one or two really great studios out there with really great management and really great teams, and they're going to have a cool idea. And I have no idea what that idea is going to be or what platform it's going to be on, but they're going to do well with it.
All right.
It's just a matter of time before the Rovio of Manila happens.
All right.
Yeah, so, people don't think about it like that. People will tell you, oh my God, exciting, amazing place for games. Not 10 years ago, it wasn't. Nobody knew Helsinki existed 10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
The shit Rovio, when they shipped Flappy Bird, it was like their 50th game. They'd made God knows how many, games that nobody cared about before that came out. But suddenly a couple studios, Supercell and Rovio, did well. And if you go look at the pedigree of most Finnish game studios that are doing well, you'll find a whole lot of Rovio and a whole lot of Supercell in them, right? You'll find that the investors are similar. You'll understand, you'll see that a lot of the ways they're doing business is similar. And in fact, there's a lot of sort of cross-pollination of staff between those places. Sooner or later, Manila and Jakarta and Singapore will all have their Rovio moment, and it will put those places on the map. And I think if anyone had told you even 6 months before Angry Birds happened that, the way Finland is going to do it is going to be through casual mobile games, nobody knew that, right? It just had to happen.
That's right.
God only knows what it's going to be, but within the next 5 years, at least 2 of those 3 cities are going to have their Angry Birds moment, and something's going to break out, and it's going to be a big deal.
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of, let's go back to BoomZap in your game. So how do you think you'd categorize Last Regiment? Put it or its inspiration?
So Last Regiment at its heart is a simultaneous turn-based strategy game. And the simultaneous bit is the important bit, right? So if you think about most turn-based strategy games, let's say you and I and Nelson and Miriam are all playing a game. I'm going to take a turn. Nelson's going to take a turn. You're going to take a turn. Miriam's going to take a turn. And while you guys are taking your turns, I have to sit around and wait for you to take your turns. And, that's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. It takes forever, right? The other big thing is when my turn finally comes, all of your turns are going to have already been resolved. And all I'm doing is reacting to what you did. Right. This is how, for instance, Civilization plays.
That's correct.
What we do is we turn that on its ear and we say, look, everyone is going to plan their turn at exactly the same time. So all 4 of us are going to move all of our dudes around. And when you move all your dudes, you actually see little arrows that show you this is where they're going to go. They're going to go here. They're going to go there. But they don't actually move yet. And this does 2 things. One, because we're all planning our turn at the same time, it goes really fast, right? So I'm going to plan my turn while everyone else plans their turn. We're all going to push the go button, and I'm going to see everything resolve at once, and then we're going to do it again. So the game goes a lot faster. That's part of it. But the other part of it is I don't know what you're going to do until I've already committed to what I'm going to do. And so instead of it being a game about me reacting to what you did, it becomes a game about me trying to look at the tactical situation, predict what I think you're going to do, make my moves based on that, And then when resolution happens, there's sort of a reveal where I find out, oh no, he totally didn't do that thing that I thought he was going to do. He did this other thing, right? Mm-hmm. It creates a much more sort of thoughtful experience where you have to really kind of think about, you know, I think he's going to do that, but he can see the same situation and he knows I think that he's going to do that, so he's going to do something different, but he knows that I know that he knows. It's that sort of situation, right? Yeah. It creates
my head already hurts thinking about it right now.
But it creates a very cerebral game, and people get really invested in it, where they're like, "Oh, that guy totally did that thing that I knew he wasn't. I knew I shouldn't have done this." Right? It's very fun. So that's the gameplay side of it. But there's also the story side of it, which is, when we put it together, we knew we wanted to make a fantasy game because we have all these great fantasy artists, and we come from Dungeons and Dragons and from this fantasy background, so we wanted to have that be part of it. But there's so many games out there where it's like, yeah, here's the orc castle and the elves live in the woods, and it's like, okay, I've seen fantasy, I've done it before. And all fantasy tends to be sort of based on this this sort of Western European medieval thing, right? It's all, and we said, what if we don't base it on that? What if we base it on the colonial period? What if we ask, what if when, say, Christopher Columbus had come to America with all of his guns and his technology and his steel, and he found the Native Americans there, but the Native Americans weren't Native Americans. They were actually like goblins and orcs that had magic. What would that have looked like, right? And so we don't actually use, Christopher Columbus. We don't actually use the Europe or that other stuff. But we've created a fantasy world sort of based on that colonial period and based on that colonial stuff. And once we sort of opened up that chest and we started looking at, unpacking what this means, we suddenly found out that it actually starts to involve ideas about colonialism. And, what is a society? What does a colonial society look like with magic and elves and orcs and griffins? How are, how do we deal with questions like slavery, right? Which was a real question of the colonial period. How do we deal with questions about, racial issues and those sort of things? And so it became kind of a fun lore for us because we could deal with a lot of lore issues that don't usually get dealt with in fantasy games, right? And we started asking ourselves, what would these different groups of people look like? What if there were, what if the goblins refused to use magic? What would their society look like? What if goblins and elves shared an idea about society in which society was ruled by women, and the men were all servants and did the dirty jobs and did the dying while the women controlled the societies? All of these sort of questions kind of made for a very, very different lore. And so we have a very deep single player game that we're building. That's actually what we're spending most of our time on right now, where you walk through this campaign and you learn about this land and you explore through these areas and you learn all of this lore. We have a great big lore encyclopedia and stuff. So it's been a lot of fun to build all that. And I think it's actually been particularly interesting for our team because obviously Southeast Asia has a colonial history, right? And so for me, it's been really interesting because I feel like this is a fantasy world that Southeast Asians can understand or not understand, but can feel part of in a way that
relate to that.
Yeah. I mean, a Filipino doesn't really have the heritage of knights and castles in Northern Europe and snow and all of that. But our game has, jungles and colonists and people coming over and telling them, you guys all have to work on a chain gang. And Southeast Asia has these experiences, right?
Exactly.
So for me, it's actually been really, really kind of fun to build this kind of game with a Southeast Asian crew. It's actually been kind of fun.
Oh, okay. Well, the moment you actually spoke of like several the types of people living together and all that, I thought you were talking about Metro Manila or something. So, but kidding aside, I mean, you're basically reinventing chess here, the way the gameplay works.
It actually comes closer to, we originally got the idea, and we had a similar bit of gameplay with Legends of Kalasia, our first strategy game, and people loved it. People love that part of the gameplay. And I actually stole it from a board game called Diplomacy. I don't know if you've ever played. Yeah. So, in Diplomacy, you've got all these pieces you put out on the board, and, everyone writes down their turn, and they put it in a hat, and then you read the turns out at the same time.
Yep.
And I used to actually play on I used to go to game conventions and do competition diplomacy when I was a young high school nerd. And I loved the aspect of being able to backstab in diplomacy. And so we actually, both in Legends of Kalasia and in Last Regiment, have put in a full alliance system. And importantly, the alliance system can be broken in the middle of the game, right? So I might, over in chat be like, okay, I'm going to build up this big army. We're going to run in. You take this guy and that guy. You send your guy to move your allies' units. And again, because you don't actually move the unit, it just shows your ally, oh, your ally would like you to move here, right? But you don't have to do what your ally told you to do, right?
Yep.
And so you might have a whole conversation with the ally. This is how we're going to set it up. You're going to go here. You're going to do that. All right, are you in? Oh, yeah, I'm in. And then when the actual resolution happens, you find out your ally did the exact opposite, attacked the guys that you thought he was going to support, and broke his alliance with you and joined up with your enemy, right? And you don't know that until you've already committed to your action. So you're stupidly marching along like, oh, I'm going to be supported in this. Everyone's going to be, I'm going to have these guys taking these guys out with artillery before I get there. And the artillery doesn't happen. And instead the artillery is dropped on you. It creates these incredibly salty multiplayer games.
Yeah, I'm already thinking about it. I'm like, wow, this is actually a good platform. And I'm thinking of an overarching tournament here where it's actually playable on a competitive level, if you ask me.
It's one of the things that we talk about a lot. One of the problems with, again, going back to why we changed out from Legends of Kalasia to Last Regiment, some of the mechanics in Legends of Kalasia were a little obscure. It was a little difficult to know, why did this guy take this much damage? There was a little bit of RNG in it that people weren't comfortable with, and it made it not as fun for tournament play. But in Last Regiment, because we sort of realized that was a stumbling block to people who wanted to play it competitively, we actually made sure that all of the math is very clearly right there in front of you. The actual mechanics of, if I attack you with my cavalry, how does it do damage? It's very straightforward. My cavalry has an attack strength of 4. He's got 8 hit points. You have an strength of 3, and you've got 10 hit points. When we bang against each other, you're going to do your attack strength worth of attack points. It's going to get subtracted from the hit points. Bam, you're done. Really straightforward. And you see it right there on the screen. So it's very, and this is critical, we found, especially in a game with these really complex movement, because I need to know, if I put my guy here and I do that, if I plan out this whole thing, I'm doing all the math in my head for, I'm going to do 2 points of damage, and I'm going to shoot him with this arrow. That's going to do another 2 points of damage. He's got 4 hit points, so that'll kill him. And after he dies, I can run my cavalry through this area and attack this guy on the other side. And because I can see all the math right there on the screen very easily, I can make these sort of complicated long-term plans. And we did that particularly for the purpose of allowing for tournament play. I would love to see, and it is my secret dream, that at ESGS next year, we actually have a tournament, and you can actually come by our booth and see a little tournament played. I mean, I doubt we're going to have the great, big, huge League of Legends stage, but I certainly think it would be cool if we had enough players in the Philippines that were interested, that would come for a small tournament, and play the final match there at ESGS. And that would be my secret dream, if we could ever make that happen.
Well, you could definitely bet on that, because, I mean, Filipinos, if it's addicting enough, if it's competitive enough, everyone will be there. I mean, if you've been to ESGS, I think you've seen those, what do you call this? I mean, very few even doubt that you'd see it here. But there are tabletop games over there, and people argue all the time, because we love to argue. I mean, when it comes to playing games and everything. So I think when you guys actually release this, you'll be seeing a lot of Filipino gamers getting addicted to this particular gameplay that you guys have concocted here. I wouldn't want to say created here, because you guys are evil. You guys are.
It's one of the things I really love about the Philippines is, the Philippine game development community is growing. It's a wonderful community. I have a lot of love for it. We've built our studio with Philippine labor. But you also have great game players. I mean, the Philippines loves video games. The Philippines loves board games. They're dedicated to their games. They have some of the most active competitive players in the world. It's when you look at the size of the population, and especially when you look at the sort of spending power of the Philippine population, they bat way over their weight. I mean, they're fighting way out of their weight class in terms of loving games and supporting games. So it's for us, it's just a great home. It's a great place to be able to, we're a pan Southeast Asian studio, but in many ways, we call the Philippines home. It's where most of our staff calls home. It's, ESGS, that's our home turf when we go to that convention. So for us, I just really love being part of the Philippines and being part of the Philippine gaming community.
Yeah, that's great to hear, man. I mean, yeah, we're pretty much in that, particularly the game that you're creating right now, is pretty much in the realm of how Filipinos actually play. We'd want to play together most of the time. Very few. Like people like me, very few actually play single player games, but more of a multiplayer and particularly competitive. You could hear that. You can hear the stories in internet cafes getting all rowdy and everything. I mean, you wouldn't see that anywhere else other than Southeast Asia, particularly in the Philippines. So basically, I'm just interested. How far is the game right now? So
we're in a closed beta right now. For anyone who is, we have a Discord. Come join our Discord. I'll put the link to the Discord in your Discord or somewhere. We'll figure out somewhere to put a Discord link.
Yeah, we'll get it linked up. Don't worry.
But come to our Discord and let me know that you heard this podcast, and we'll get you in the closed beta. Anyone cool enough to listen to this podcast, I will get you in the closed beta and we'll get you a copy of the game. So that's a done thing. We're going to be in closed beta for a little bit longer. We're hoping to go into early access. I was hoping for November, but realistically, it's looking like maybe early next year we're going to move into early access. Okay. We're probably going to be in early access for at least 4 or 5 months. One of the lessons that we learned from Legends of Kalasia was just to stay in early access longer to make sure the game is perfect before you release it. So we're going to, and it's a strategy game. Strategy games are just, testing it is time consuming as hell. We have it's a game that we have all of these different units, and each one of these different units has its own strengths and weaknesses and special powers. We have mages that throw fireballs. We have cavalry that can charge. We have guns that, artillery and things that can curse each other, things that can buff each other, blah, blah, blah. There's all this different stuff. And when you put all that into a game, you have to test it, and you have to test X against Y, now X against Y and Z. And, we have, I think right now, 120 different units in the game, which is, that's almost as many cards as Hearthstone started with. So, it's a lot of units with a lot of different things to test against each other. So it's just going to be a while before it's all perfectly balanced. And we want to make sure that we release with all that stuff really working well and balanced well.
Okay, this might be a stretcher, but what's the path here for the game? Are you gonna improve this to like DLCs or expansions or something like that?
Yeah. So one thing that we've kind of promised, and I'm we've had a lot of people tell us we're stupid for it, but I'm sticking behind it, is we are not a free to play game. So there's not going to be any buying decks and trying to get the Alexstrasza dragon. That's not a part of our game.
Okay.
Instead, we are a try-buy game. So you'll get a free demo. The free demo will let you play multiplayer. It'll let you play a couple rounds of the first couple missions in single player. But the number of cards that you'll have available, the units that you have available to you will be limited. if you're into it, there's a one-time purchase. We're still working on what that purchase price is, but again, one of our lessons from Legends of Kalasia was we didn't do regional pricing for that, and I think for this game we will do regional pricing because let's face it, Filipinos just don't have as much money as Americans do. So if we want a bunch of Filipinos to play our game, we gotta charge them less money. So we will do regional pricing for the game. Once we've got the first version out with whatever the regional price is that we determine. In the States, I think we're looking at a price point of about $20. I don't know what that'll be in the Philippines, but it'll be less than $20. Once we have the first version out, we intend to do downloadable content. The downloadable content will be additional missions for the single player campaign, and each one of those missions will come with new units that are sort of around that campaign, and you'll be able to use those units in skirmish and in multiplayer. And that'll be paid downloadable content, but again, we'll try to keep that paid downloadable content at some reasonable price, and also a regionally priced reasonable price. One of the things that we realized from Legends of Kalasia is if you have a multiplayer game, you need to have users, right? Because there's a cycle. The guy gets into your game, thinks your multiplayer looks like fun, but there's nobody to play against, so he doesn't play. And because he doesn't play, there's nobody there when the next guy comes in, right?
That's right.
So to break that cycle, one of the things that we can use the developing world for, right, places like Manila and Jakarta, there's lots of people down there that want to play games. And if we can price this game at a level where guys in Manila or guys in Jakarta can play, then we can use those countries to sort of make sure there's players, right? And so that way, when people who are coming in from other parts of the world want to play a game, hey, look, there's some guy in Manila or some guy in Kuala Lumpur that wants to play a game with him. But one of the hard lessons of Legends of Kalasia was, if you ask a guy in Manila to pay $20 for a game, that's a lot of money for a country where a lot of people earn $500 a month. Right?
Yeah, that's true.
So we have to be realistic about our pricing strategies.
Since you guys are going on early access, and you've got this path already lined up, you got DLCs, adding up to adding some units and everything. When it comes to BoomZap, do you think this particular game, Last Regiment, will be your pinnacle? Or
the thing is, one of the reasons BoomZap's lasted as long as it's lasted is I have a philosophy about running a game company. And my philosophy is that we need to have what I call a risk portfolio. And the risk portfolio means I don't ever put all my eggs on one game, right?
Okay.
And so we're actually a larger studio than just this one game. So Last Regiment's got about 6 people working on it. BoomZap's about a 30-person company. And so the rest of the company, we've got a team working on a really great mobile game with a publisher. Actually, a co-development partner is a better way to talk about that relationship. We've got another team that's doing a work-for-hire game for a European publisher. And then we've got another team working on something which is super hush-hush, and I can't talk about it right now, but it's really exciting.
Okay. All right.
So, in that world, if any one of those projects gets canceled or doesn't do well, it doesn't destroy the studio, right? And we've always worked like that. We've always tried to spread our risk across multiple publishers, across different development models. Last Regiment is probably our riskiest project because that's the one that we're actually self-publishing. We're developing it with money out of my pocket. Every month when we pay artists, it comes out of Chris and Alan's wallet. So that's the one we're putting sort of the most skin into, but it's also the one where the potential reward is highest. If it does really well, then all of that money is ours, as opposed to other games where we have development partners or publishing partners that we would have to share those rewards with.
Oh, okay.
And that's sort of the heart of the risk portfolio, right? At one end of the risk portfolio, you've got games where the publisher is basically paying everything. But at the other end of the risk portfolio, you've got games where, the publisher's paying nothing, but the rewards on those two ends of the portfolio are flipped, right? So in that model, you've always got a couple games where you say, look, I'm never going to get rich on this game, because even if it does really, really well, the publisher's the one that makes all the money. But you know what? I'm going to make money on this game regardless, because we're getting paid for development. And that keeps my studio alive. And it's interesting, because I think some of the more, I guess, idealistic indies hear that and they don't like the sound of it. They're like, oh, that sounds a lot like selling out to me. You know, you're doing a work for hire game for a big publisher. And I'm like, no, it's not selling out. It's called paying your bills and keeping your staff paid.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny. People are always like, oh, Chris, you've done Far Cry, you've done these other games, the studio. And that's not what I'm proud of. Probably the thing I'm most proud of is that we've run a studio for 14 years and I've never missed payroll. Right. For 14 years, every single person that's ever worked for this studio has gotten paid more or less on time, and they've gotten paid exactly what we promised them we'd pay them.
All right. Devs, job opportunity here. Just kidding.
We are hiring, by the way, but importantly, that's how we did that. And it's that statement may not sound like much, but go ask around and see how many other studios have a track record of even 5 years of never missing payroll, never being meaningfully late, never having to, pay people less than they said they would. It's a very hard thing to do as an indie studio. And that risk portfolio and the way that we run the studio is how we got there. And of all the things that I've done professionally as a game developer and as an entrepreneur, that track record is the one I'm most proud of.
And that's one thing to be proud of. So, one final question before I let you go.
Sure.
We won't be seeing Last Regiment Battle Royale, are we?
Not that I'm aware of. No.
Okay. All right. One game out of the trend. All right.
Yeah, I'm afraid that's not going to happen. So.
Okay. Probably I'll give you this time to have our listeners where they can find you, your website, and everything like that. So.
Sure. Yeah. You can find anything you want to know about BoomZap. It's at boomzap.com. If you want to know about Last Regiment, just Google search Last Regiment. The first thing that pops up, we actually have a whole website all about the game with the Discord links and everything on it. So either one of those places will get you to anywhere you want to go. If you're interested in the game, like I say, if you Google Discord Last Regiment, that'll get you to our Discord. That's where we hang out. If you have any questions or anything, I have that Discord turned on all day while I'm working. Usually someone will answer any question within a minute or two. I do a live stream every other Thursday. And in fact, hopefully I'll be doing one tomorrow. We'll see. But I do a live stream every other Thursday. You can actually tune in and watch us play the game and watch us develop the game. We do design meetings and stuff live on Twitch, so you can hear us talk about the game. There's a small but very vocal community that comes and hangs out for that. They're a good crew of people. So if you're interested at all, come check that out. And again, all the information about when we're going to stream and all that, it's all in the Discord. So the best place to go is to go to the Last Regiment Discord.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was Chris Natsuume. All right, thank you very much, Chris.
Yeah, thank you.
So that's our episode, guys. I want you guys to go ahead and check out BoomZap and their latest game, Last Regiment. Like Chris promised, you guys have anyone who listens, anyone who's interested in playing, you got an entry to the closed beta. All right, we'll hold you on to that, Chris.
Absolutely. Nothing would make me happier. Hundreds of people to come flowing in from this podcast nothing would make me happier.
All right.
So yeah, absolutely. Come to the Discord. Let me know. Hey, I heard you here. I'll make sure you're in the closed beta.
All right. We'll post all information about Last Regiment and BoomZap on when we post this. And yeah, thank you very much for having your time. And for all of you, huwag masyadong puro kalaro. You have a great day now.